Hi guys, this is Niman Kenkre for BlueFirePoker.com, and today's video will be the third and final part of the 25-50 session that Chris has played in our Protege series. We will be recording this one a few days, maybe a week after we recorded the first two parts. So the stuff that happened in the first two parts might not be completely fresh, but it's not totally stale either. How are you doing today, Chris?
Great.
All right, you got any introductory comments, or should we get right to the action?
No, let's get to it.
All right. I see that you folded Jack 10 offsuit to that under the gun raise. You think that's not plus EV for you? I don't think that's a terrible fold, but it's one that in position I typically I would call in that spot.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. I think I was playing too tight on that table for some reason, and because I was watching it from our last video.
When you were reviewing it, okay.
And on table two,
Yep.
this is a spot that just drives me crazy.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Let me pause here and talk about it. I don't know what you've done. I'm just paused it after the flop has come down. You haven't acted yet. When you have a pair, medium pair like this, and my usual MO, and I think a good general template to start following, is to call the re-raise, and then when you flop something like this, where the flop is kind of out of the playing range, and you're overcarded by one card, you can usually check and call once, now, and then fold if they bet again. Now, there's some dynamics that will change that, of course, and the primary thing is the opponent's tendencies. If you find an opponent that double barrels often, you can start adjusting to that by calling the flop bet a little bit less often and calling the turn bet a little bit more often. Does that make sense? So, like my standard template is to when you call with a hand like this in a 3-bet pot and you're out of position, to check call the flop and then fold to another bet anywhere in the hand. Because, and the reason I say that, by the way, this is not just a general random rule, is I think that's a little bit exploitative of how people typically tend to play in terms of their frequencies. And what I mean by that is when somebody 3-bets pre-flop, they will usually fire a continuation bet on the flop, whether or not they have anything. If that continuation bet is called, they will usually not fire a second bet unless they actually have something. So basically what happens is people are, if they're the 3-better, they're betting the flop a little bit too much, and they are not betting, you're not double barreling on the turn or river often enough. So therefore, to exploit that pattern of frequency, a good template is to check call once and fold to subsequent heat. But as I was saying, good players are going to not be quite as predictable, and against them you have to vary your frequencies as well, accordingly. So where you can call down thin, you can call twice or whatever. But again, now we're talking about deviant lines. I think if you don't know anything, the starting point that you should work with is to check call once and check fold on a subsequent street. Now, there are a few things that can deviate that standard play. One thing would be like if an ace is on the flop. I think, granted, if the players could 3-bet with a wide range, but usually you're not going to be plus EV to just continue with an ace on the flop, I think. I mean, again, you can use your judgment based on the opinion, but based on the player. But if an ace is on the flop, you can check fold right away to the flop bet, I think. Since it now, they could have had you, overpaired, but now also they've hit if they were raising with ace king, ace queen, ace jack, whatever. The second thing is if there's 2 Broadway cards or 3 Broadway cards on the flop, then I usually wouldn't call. So, like, if the flop had contained between king, queen, jack, and 10. If it contains two of those cards, I would usually check and fold. But if it doesn't, if it contains only one Broadway card that's not an ace, I think you can usually call once, even if there's more than one overcard to your pair. So like let's say you had pocket fives and the flop was 10-8-2. I would still think you can check call once until and unless you find that this particular opponent has got a good, double barrel frequency. Of course, another thing to deviate from that too is if they're the type of player that, when they 3-bet ace king ace queen, then they're not going to follow with a continuation bet. There are those players around where they will 3-bet with a good overcard hand, but then if they don't hit it, they're not going to fire an auto continuation bet. You need to identify those players, and against them you just check and fold on the flop itself, because when they bet the flop they usually already have you beat. But everything I'm telling you, it all needs to be malleable. You need to be able to deviate it for your opponent. But what I've given you is a decent rule of thumb, and I think that rule of thumb can sort of be your starting point, and then you adjust as per your opponent's tendencies. Does that all make sense?
It does, except I feel like when an ace hits the flop, I feel like there'd be times when they're going to have kings, queens, and jacks. It seems like you should be able, maybe if you're in position, you can call a bet or not.
Well, you mean with the idea of bluffing at it later? Because if an ace flops, sometimes they have kings, queens, and jacks, but like the kings, queens, and jacks beat you as well as the ace X hands now. So there's a lot. So when an ace hits, there's more hands that beat you. So if you want to call a bet there, you're doing it more to try to take it away later, because you want to.
Right, that's what I meant.
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, it's a little bit more of a high variance play, and you have to. I guess that would be a good spot to be on the lookout. You know how a lot of players, they tend to give away a little bit by varying their bet sizes. So let's say they have pocket kings and the flop comes down ace high. Sometimes you'll see, if you're looking for it, they'll take a little something off that flop bet. You know what I mean? So you can be alert to that. If they, and when they do that, you can float it to try to take away later, or you can raise it, but, be aware of that. I mean, obviously, be careful, because sometimes that little small bet can mean other things. But if you see a person betting a certain way in that spot, if they have ace-king when an ace is on board, and you see them betting a different way another time, now you can try to pounce on that potentially, you know what I mean, and try to represent the ace. I think, I've taught you to be alert to when players adjust their bet sizes, because the actual amount that they bet, the amount that they deviate isn't that much, but if you're looking for it, it's very evident. So you can look for, and that's a common spot. If they 3-bet with a big hand, and now that big hand gets overcarded, they tend to sometimes make sort of like less than what they would normally bet kind of bets, and if you're alert to that, you can certainly try to take advantage of that. Yes.
Yeah, because for me, all in all, I just feel like when I call like this particular hand, when I call here pre-flop, I just always, no matter what comes down, if an ace comes down, I check and give up, right? And then if whatever, if these kind of cards come down, I check call, and then they bet the turn and I fold. It just seems like my EV on these hands has been, I mean, not my EV, but my value that I've gotten out of them is really negative. So now I just want to brace you for what's about to happen. I played with this player. This player seems to like to 3-bet a decent amount. And what I noticed is whenever he or she 3-bets, it's always like bet, and I've called before, and then it's a bet on the turn. So, and it's like, there's no way he can have it every time. So I decided, okay, I'm going to try something new here. And this one particular hand, because I hadn't tried this against this opponent, I decided that to see how he would react to me betting out on the flop, and it didn't go very well.
Yeah, I think that's a very bad idea, because if you bet on the flop, I mean, he's either gonna fold the hands that you beat or raise with them. And I imagine you're not betting on the flop to call a raise.
No, I mean, I totally, no, I know you're right. But what I'm saying is given that I've played with this player and every time it seems like, and I'm talking about not just twice, like maybe like 8, 10 times.
He bets the flop and then again bets the turn. Well, the correct adjustment would be to call twice then against him. If you think you're nines, you see, you have to make an evaluation. By the way, guys, I realize this is a lengthy discussion about one hand, but it's a very common spot and a very, very important discussion. So that's why, I hope you guys don't mind that we're getting into it in detail. I think it is a very, very important situation that comes up all the time, and presumably for you guys it comes up all the time as well. Yeah, Chris, I think it's the onus is on you now to evaluate if your nines are ahead of his double barreling frequency. Some players will three bet a lot, and then they will keep, they'll fire two barrels routinely. Well, ask yourself this: if you check call this, and whatever falls on the turn, and you check and he bets again, does your nines rate to be ahead of that? And not only ahead, it doesn't have to be like better half the time. It only has to be better, a third of the time. If he's, it's not quite that simple because there's the river to contend with, but a third of the time if he bets full pot, and less than that if he doesn't bet full pot. So, the point here is that if he's double barreling with too high of a frequency, your correct adjustment is not to now bet into him. That's a bad adjustment. Your correct adjustment would be to, grit your teeth and check call him twice.
Yeah, well, you just said it right there. And what's happened when I originally decided to do that, and what happened was, I check, called, and the turn, say it was this board was like a jack, or maybe it was a 3, but I check called again, and then the river was like a king, and you know what I mean? It was like, I check folded because I was like, well, is he really 3-barrel bluffing? And I just, so much confusion, that I said, okay, I'm going to try to bet out. But I'm totally clear that it's not a good play.
Yeah, it's, what happened is you probably, this is what I speculate, and tell me if this makes sense. And you guys that are watching this video, I suspect that this is going to be part of your thought process too. When you have a guy that's very aggressive like that, it becomes upsetting, to deal with. Do you know what I mean? You're checking and calling here, and then that there's a likelihood of another overcard coming at some point in the hand, and he's going to keep firing at you. And are you good? Do you just, it's tough because you don't want to call twice and then fold on the river, but do you really want to call twice, et cetera, et cetera? But the fact of the matter is, you got to evaluate his frequencies. How often is he 3-betting, and when he 3-bets, how often is he firing multiple barrels? If your nines stand to be ahead of the board and his barrels, then, you can play your hand as a bluff catcher, and you can just check call it down. And there's nothing wrong with your hand being ahead of a range that he would bet twice, but not ahead of a range that he would bet 3 times. So you could conceivably check call twice and fold the third time. There was a thread on the forums in which someone had mentioned that any hand that you call 2 barrels with, you got to call the river too, which is just a terrible, terrible way to look at things. It has to be a range with which you call 1, a range with which you call 2, and a range with which you call 3, and each range is subsequently stronger. Clearly this player is one who makes your life difficult by betting a lot, and so against a player like that, you want to loosen up the range with which you call him down. I think what you did here is you tried to make your play easier, and we've talked about you know what I mean, and that's what we've talked about, and I know you understand the concept, from a theoretical standpoint, is you should always strive to play in the highest expected value way possible, not in the easiest way possible. That's why we never do stupid things like raise for information and stuff like that. That's just such a bad play, and you're aware of that, I know. But in this case, I think you just didn't want to deal with having to, deal with his barreling, and so you decided to just clarify stuff for yourself by betting into him, which is definitely a poor play here.
Yep.
I know it's not pleasant to be sitting there facing a board of, 2, 4, 7, 10 king, and have him fire at it 3 times and call. But if evaluate based on his frequencies and what you've seen from this player that your hand stands to be ahead of the the range of hands that he would be doing that with, well then by all means you should be calling.
Yeah, I couldn't get to it. I never got to an evaluation with this player, and I forgot one of the big reasons why, which may be interesting, is I never got to showdown, and I've never witnessed a showdown with this player.
Well, you don't have to see his hands to if you can form an opinion based on his frequencies.
No, absolutely, and I understand doing that, and I've done that before when there isn't as much riding on it. But I guess I feel a little more safe when I get to actually see, and I
Yeah,
can
yeah, of course, but you have to work with what you do, with what you have, and if he's three betting a lot and then barreling a lot, that the right adjustment would be to just call him down, especially on a board like this where, you presumably will have two overcards by the end to your nines, assuming that one comes under and one comes over, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like if if you check call here and the turn and river are like an ace and a king or something, yeah, you can fold. But if you check call and the turn and river are a seven and say a queen even, based on the opponent you're describing, you can call him down, yeah. And remember also when you're one more thing, I don't want to talk about this forever because we're going to bore our members here, but the other thing is, don't automatically assume that he's a wild barreler if you don't have enough of a sample set. It could be that you've run into him with marginal hands when he actually has big hands several times in a row. That can happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it could be that you just happen to run into some hands against him which you correctly folded a couple times. Yeah. That may or may not be the case, but I'm saying if you're basing this on 3 or 4 hands played against him, then you just might have run into the top of his range a couple of times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So all right. So are we cool on this? Can we move on?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Let's continue. So yeah, obviously this bet is not a good play. By the way, another adjustment for a player like this, of course, is to trap. You know what I mean? Like when you're sitting big, just let him just bet into you. Also, against a player like this, you can go ahead and play your draws hard. Like check raise, since presumably a lot of his range is going to have to fold to a check raise since he's barreling frequently. So you've got the fold equity in addition to to hand making equity. So against a player like that, you want to check raise like pretty much all your draws when you flop them.
Right.
And just check call with your monsters. And let him bluff himself off. Let him bluff off.
Now, something interesting happens on table 1. I end up heads up for a hand or two with this player. This is the first hand with this player that I consider to be pretty aggressive.
Okay.
So I end up playing quite a big pot. I like to.
Right now, here,
yeah, with a jack 8. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, obviously, heads up is a little bit more difficult to analyze because it's so opponent and flow specific. So a lot of what's going on is very specific to your opponent.
I didn't take his check raise too seriously because I felt like he could check raise with a huge amount of hands,
Okay.
like any 6, any 7.
Okay.
So I'm still thinking maybe I'm ahead, and now like that card hits.
Yeah. Right.
I'm thinking, and this player has bet scare cards before bluffing, but as you can see, that's
Yeah. Let's talk about that hand a little bit. That was an interesting. Okay, so. So his I think the street that I have the most issue with is the turn. Do you think you're going to be ahead of his range there on the turn when Like after you call the check raise and do you think he's going to fire again there?
No, so it's funny. It really raises a point of one of the fundamental errors I used to make that I've almost cleared up. Just like in the other hand, there was a fundamental error. I think what I was looking ahead and thinking, okay, no, I don't think he has me. Like I had made that decision and I wasn't putting enough stock in what he did on the turn because I had made the decision, okay, I know him. He can have ace 6, ace 7,
Yeah.
4 7. He can have anything.
Yeah. No, I think you made a common mistake, and the mistake is that you make your decisions later in the hand too early without the additional information. I mean, poker is a partial information game, and as we play and we gather information, we get more and more information the more we play. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I mean, not the more we play, the more information we get, the more we're able to assimilate it. So what happened in this hand is, you bet the flop with your top pair, and the flop, I think, had a straight on it. And keep in mind, it didn't have a flush draw either, which I think is relevant because that means he's not semi-bluffing with a flush draw. The flop was 8-7-4 or 8-5-4.
8-5-4.
Yeah, so it also there was a flop straight on board. Now, you decided that you were ahead of his flop check raising range, which is fine, which is a good very reasonable given what you're telling me about this player. So you played the flop correctly. Now, are you really ahead of his turn betting range? You have to reevaluate that. You know what I mean? Because once you call the flop, he knows that you're not just full of crap. You've got something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now, even though you've got something, he's betting into you again on the turn. The board was well coordinated. You do still have top pair. Do you really think you're ahead of his turn betting range there? I don't know because I don't know your opponent. If he's not really on the extreme end of aggression, and not just aggression for value, but like bluff aggression, I mean, I'm starting to think that your turn call was probably not good.
Yeah.
I think. And the river's interesting because he could have bet with some kind of gut shot or whatever, like some 6 and a pair and a draw, and then picked up backdoor hearts and so on. Remember, there's always the flop straight to deal with as well. However, it is quite possible that he would be betting 2 pair like that. So, and you have top 2 by the river. So your river call is debatable. I'm not going to pass judgment on it one way or the other because it's very dependent on the opponent and the flow and it's.
Well, I can tell you one quick thing. That's the river call was an easy call because that's a player who he continued like that often. Like even if he was barreling bluffs, he just if a scare card hit at all on the river, he would just go all in. So I was actually like so excited, right? Because I was like, yes, I got him.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, like I can tell you that if I'm in that spot and if I got to the river, which I probably wouldn't get to the river because not too many opponents I would call the turn there. But if I got to the river, there are certain opponents of mine that I would never call the river, and there are certain opponents that I would never dream of folding the river, and a whole bunch in between. So, I mean, I guess the bottom line in that hand, the street in which I have like absolutely no issue with your play, and like I would be upset if you played it any other way would be the flop. The street in which I have the most issue and I don't like your play is the turn. And the river is again, it's player specific, and I'll trust you on that one. So basically, the lesson to take away from this is that you want to you don't want to make your decisions earlier in the hand without the information that you're going to gather later. When in fact you can make the decision, you're always adjusting what you estimate to be his range after each subsequent street with board texture and his action. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But you seem to have not really. You sort of like you said, you decided on the flop that you were ahead of his range, and you didn't readjust his range on the turn when he kept betting.
Yeah.
So, All right, cool. Another good discussion. Should we continue?
Yeah, if you could just not this player as much as the other player on the other hand, but if you could just maybe speak quickly to. I noticed one thing. Not as many players confuse me anymore. Okay, because
Mm-hmm.
of what I've learned. But when a player does confuse me, I'm still just as bad as I used to be when a player confuses me. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes, I do know what you mean. Like I think you're referring for those of you obviously you don't know my having worked with Chris offline. He used to get confused by players, get flustered by players, and sort of play very poorly against players when they did that. And if I'm not mistaken, the players that gave you the most difficulty were the aggressive players, even if they were not necessarily good. I remember,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in fact, dating back to our days when we were first learning poker together and going and playing, in the low limit games at Foxwoods a little bit. I remember you used to say, "Oh wow, this particular guy is." I remember you were talking about one Asian guy in particular. Oh, this guy's really good. And I'm sitting there thinking, God, the guy's down, a ton. How can you say he's good? And in retrospect, it was because he was hard to play against because he was just always wildly betting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you as you've improved, you have realized that certain players are profitable to play against. But I understand what you're saying. When you do have somebody that gives you trouble, you do get flustered. And I think your biggest problem, and it could be a common problem, uh, is that you get flustered against like players that apply relentless aggression. And I mean, no question, those are the most unpleasant to play with, like in terms of your feeling that you get in your gut. You know what I mean? Your the players that are just firing and relentlessly. They force you to take hands that you would normally play medium-sized pots with and possibly play huge pots, which isn't a pleasant feeling. But at the same time, if you are balancing your frequencies and exploiting theirs better than they're doing to you, then you're gonna win. You're gonna it may just be scary. You may play a very very high variance style having played against them, but you're going to ultimately beat them. The mistake that I don't want you to make, which I think you might be making a little bit, is you take a guy who is very aggressive and applies a lot of pressure, and then just assume that he doesn't have anything when he's firing. Whereas even like a guy that is very aggressive is still there's going to be situations where he's not going to be aggressive without having a range that beats the hand that you have. So even though he's aggressive, that doesn't mean you just say, okay, this guy's aggressive. I'm going to close my eyes because I have third pair and just check call, check call, check call. You know, that's not the right thing to do, and I think it's a common mistake. I think you still have to think. There's no substitute for thinking. You can say, okay, well, this guy's check raised me and now he's betting into me here again. He's a very aggressive player, so he's likely to do that with such and such a range, but would he really do that here in this spot without having me beaten? Because clearly I've represented to him that I blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. You have to still do the analysis. And I think that the mistake that you might be making, which is not an uncommon mistake, is to get flustered, get emotionally flustered by a player that is relentlessly aggressive, and then just deciding in your mind, you know what, this guy's relentlessly aggressive. I've got a marginal hand. I'm not going to do any further analysis. I've got second pair. Let him bet and I'm calling. You know what I mean? Rather than
Yep.
doing more detailed analysis. I think this is a very important point, a very important discussion. And we can, I don't want to just keep talking ad infinitum here. But I think that this is a very important point that hopefully our members can take away, because again, it's a very, very common way of, getting, playing poorly by players that ordinarily play well. And also, Chris, I think this is something that we can talk about offline as we chart your progress, because it is a very important point. I can tell you, by the way, I'll give you an example of one particular player who intrinsically is a very poor player, but in actuality is probably a very big winner. He's a pretty common and well-known player on PokerStars. He goes by the screen name 20 Buck Spin. And I think he's a very bad player. I mean, he's God, I hope he's not a member listening to this. But I think but I'm now going to say that even though he's an intrinsically a bad player, he's an extremely big winner. And the reason is he's not a terrible player, right? He knows what's going on. But he's so wildly aggressive that players get so flustered against him that they end up playing worse. So let's say on a scale of, 1 to 100, his game is only like a 25. Okay, whereas like your average decent good player will be like a 50. His game's only a 25, but he's a huge winner because players that are normally playing at a level of 50 or 60 play like fives against him. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you have to try not to do. You have to be able to play a more high variance style because it's being forced upon you, and still play it well and still do analysis and still think. A player being aggressive means that you need to sometimes call him down thinner, but that doesn't give you license to just completely just close your eyes and call down no matter what comes and when he's betting or whatever, because it doesn't give you a license to stop thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right.
No, I got it.
All right, great. Yeah, I didn't mean to browbeat the point, but it is really important, so I wanted to drive it home both to you as well as to our members. I'm resuming the video now.
Just because there's a few seconds here, I think, when I don't do anything particularly interesting, I've been starting to think like my ace deuce there.
Yep.
I almost do you value ace deuce more than like ace seven because of the kind of
the wheel potential?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Because I was almost thinking there were some spots where, you know what I mean, like
I'd definitely rather have ace five than ace six. If I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Now here I am on table one raising ace jack, and as you can see though, he folded because the lone wolf was the
Yep. I
type
saw.
of guy to limp fold.
Yep. Nope. I saw the play. I liked it. It's we talked about a play like that, similar play, in part one.
Yeah.
This
Right,
was
didn't we?
yeah. This was slightly different because you were you were in the small blind. So it's a hand. I want to pause here for a second because it's an important point. The difference between that hand and this hand is that in that hand you were in the big blind. So a raise would have only given you the responsibility of the initiative and with the limper and you out of position. On the other hand, in this case, you were raising, and by raising, you shut out the big blind, and obviously your hand is going to play better heads up. So that makes a lot of difference. If you were in the big blind and it folded around to you, then you could consider, just checking depending on the player. Of course, if he's a limp folder, as you said, then of course I would raise. There's a big intrinsic difference when you have a high card hand like that, facing a limper when you're in the small blind versus the big blind. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, no, I forgot about that difference, but let's take the case that he's a limp caller. Now I may have just completed there, right? Depending on what I think of the big
Yeah,
blind.
depending on.
Oh,
No. With ace jack, when he limps, if his limping range is weak and you're good, I would still raise with the ace jack, because and shut out the big blind, because I still think that if he's a limp caller and you're taking, even though you're out of position, I think that basically, if you look at the two situations, you play a limped pot three-way ace jack with the big blind, you first act with the worst position and it's three-way, and with the big blind not having any definable range, versus you playing a heads-up pot with the big blind shut out of position, but with ace jack with a hand that stands to be significantly better than the limper's range. I think option 2 is going to be better. I think that when you have a chance to shut out the big blind in a situation like that, you should do it. So I wouldn't have just completed. I would have raised even if you expect him to call.
Okay.
The key point being, again, shutting out the big blind when you have a hand that plays a lot better heads up than three-way.
Got it.
All right. The the threes hand. Can you just tell me what happened? Uh, Pre-flop, was that a re-raised pot?
No, I raised, and then he led the flop.
All right. I don't know that I like your call there. It's a tempting call. Like I'm going to pause here again. It's a tempting call if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Like you're sitting there and you might be ahead, but you've got an out to a straight flush. You know what I mean? But I don't think it's a good call. Because when you think about what his range is, how you're doing against his range there, I don't think it's really good. You know what I mean? Plus,
No, it's not a call I normally make. It was just player specific. I mean, this guy was kind of tight, and I saw him as someone who might bet the flop with like his ace of spade or even whatever. Like, I don't. Yeah, you're right though. There's still he's going to be ahead of me a lot of the time. I do see that.
yeah, and the times that he's behind, he's going to catch up. And the times when you do hit your hand, whatever that means, you know, you're still not in a great position. I mean, if you hit a set, there's a four straight on board and a three flush on board. If you make a flush, it's a three high flush. If you make a straight, it's the bottom end of a four card straight, and he's going to be ahead of you most of the time. So I don't think it's a good call.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. Even against a tight player now, I see. Yeah.
All right.
I wonder what he had.
Yeah, that is an interesting flop to just bet and then give up on, I think. Did you the queen four you re-raised pre-flop, right?
No.
Oh, you just called?
Yes.
Okay, no, that's fine. And then you decide to float. That's reasonable.
Yeah, I did. I had done that same thing to this player earlier. I think.
Yeah. No, I think this is a reasonable play. Wow, now you're getting really.
Don't get nervous.
I wasn't expecting that. It's not. I don't hate it though. I'm thinking about it. I thought that now of course now you turn the flush draw. I kind of like it, and I said that even before I saw him fold. That was a nice creative play because I think that when he bets again, yeah, let's talk about that one. That was a nice creative play. When he bets the flop, you're calling because you're hoping he has nothing, and then he's going to check and fold on the turn, obviously, because you have no pair, no draw. On the turn, you pick up. And by the way, a float like that is nice when you can pick up a draw, and or you have an overcard like you did. So it was a reasonable spot to float, especially because it's kind of a BSy board. Jack 3-5 rainbow. So it's not like he can put you on a draw or anything. So you're gonna have more credibility to represent that you have something. And then you pick up the flush draw on the turn, and he bets again. Now, when he bets again, I think you can put him on a hand, a legitimate percentage of the time. You know what I mean? Like I think he's actually going to have a jack or something like that. So I thought at first your raise might be a little bit dicey, but then again, if you feel that he's double barreling often, or value betting thin, tens or something like that. And or B, you think that he can give you credit for a big hand there, then I really like your raise. And actually, the more I think about it, the more I like it. I'm really happy. I'm really really proud of you for that play. I don't think I would have. I didn't find it myself right now while watching the video, because the thing is, because the flop was so dry, and now he bets the turn and you raise. It's very very difficult for him not to see you as being extremely strong there. Do you know what I mean? It's not like you're raising, a drawy board on the flop where he can say, okay, I've got the up pair and he's going to have a draw off. And I mean, you called a completely dry board and then you raised only when it got a little scary, which is a very very credible way that you would play a hand like a set or maybe a turn two pair Jack 9 or something like that. I mean, you're hand looks extremely strong simply because it's hard for him to put you on anything that's not, he can't put you on some kind of a draw, and you're showing extreme strength in the face of him showing strong. So I think that he should, quote unquote, should fold any one pair hand there, even aces. The question that you of course have to ask yourself is, would he? Because some players are going to be, if they've got top pair or better, and I think that there's a good chance that he would have had top pair or better in that spot. They're just not going to fold it. You know what I mean? Because they're just, stations, and that's how you make your money when you actually hit your hand. But if you think that this player was good enough, it was a very good spot to represent. Of course, adding in the fact that you do have outs if you're called because you turn that flush draw.
I think his range, like you said, does have a lot of top pair and over pair, but I think I played with him a lot. I think it also he double barrels a bit. So given that he could be double barreling too, I thought it was a good spot. But I wish I could say that I took into account the flop texture, like you mentioned too, but not as much, like to some degree, but not like the way you mentioned.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we talked about it because the flop texture is what makes it a particularly good play. The fact that that the board was so dry that you could be, especially in position, could well be expected to slow play a set or something like that. You know what I mean? If I'm sitting there in his spot and I've got pocket aces, unless I've seen you get out of line consistently, that should be a fairly routine fold. You know what I mean? Because you're not playing King Jack like that, presumably. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're playing something very strong, and so basically, my pocket aces are only beating a bluff in that spot. But the thing is, given that the board was so dry on the flop, it's hard to put you on any kind of a bluff. You know what I mean? A semi bluff.
Yep.
So it was a good play. Well done.
All right. Thanks.
I'd actually thought that this video was going to be shorter since we only had like about 16 minutes of actual playtime to get through, but there's obviously a lot of really nice spots, and that have involved some lengthy discussion, so this actually may turn out to be a long video. I don't know about that fold there, Chris.
Yeah, you've been teaching me about that recently. We've been talking about that
especially blind versus blind. Yeah,
Yeah.
blind versus blind, queen jack suited. I think that's a pretty weak tight fold. I think you should definitely call there. There's a lot of flops that you can play aggressively, and then if you make a pair, it's usually good enough to check call, and you're not going to get barreled off that too much. And if you flop a draw, you can play that really aggressively, with a lot of equity usually. So yeah, I think that's a very poor fold. Especially blind versus blind.
On table one, I'm raising here for to protect my hand.
Hold on, are we calibrated here? You just folded 8-3 offsuit on table one.
Oh, I'm sorry. On the next hand.
Okay, yep, you got 10. Okay, so you're raising for protection, is what you're telling me.
Yeah. Not for info.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like it. I think you put yourself in a position to have to fold the best hand sometimes. You give up. You miss your chance to hit a two outer, and if you are ahead, I'm going to pause here again because you also have got another hand on table four. I don't know if it turns out to be interesting or not. Yeah, I think that this should be a pretty standard call because if your opponent at most, it's a classic way ahead, way behind situation. Maybe not quite as dramatic as other, but your opponent is probably, if you're behind, you have two outs. If you're ahead, your opponent probably has at most 6 outs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a pretty bad spot for a raise.
Against 6 outs, huh? Okay.
That's at most. And you never know. I mean, especially you're telling me this player's really aggressive. So if he flopped a flush draw, presumably he would do something like that. If he had pocket nines, maybe he would do something like that. I think you put yourself in a position to have to either in this case as you did, fold the best hand a decent percentage of the time. I mean, this is one of those ones that follows like Samo's golden rule: don't make a raise if you're not ready to handle a re-raise. And I think that you might be thinking, well, I can raise this and fold, but I don't think you can. Um,
Mm.
you know what I mean? So I think that should have
Yeah.
been. It's a pretty standard spot too, so I think it's a pretty clear technical mistake. I think that's a pretty clear spot to just call. Pretty much
Okay.
with the entire range, by the way. That's it. That that on that kind of a flop, your entire range that you would continue with, you should probably just call. Shall I continue?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I liked it. I like the bet there with the queen ten when the jack hits. I like it a lot. Did you just check the ace king there?
Yes.
I don't like it at all. I really dislike that. I'm going to pause here. Here's the thing. When you have a hand like, whatever, 10-9 suited, and you bet that flop, and you get called, you want to be able to bet the ace, because the ace is usually not going to help your opponent. You know what I mean? If he called on the flop, the ace is usually not going to help him. You're obviously not folding your hand. And since you want to be able to bluff the ace when you're the pre-flop raiser, you need to bet it when you have it. Another thing to keep in mind, too, is your opponent posted in this hand. I don't know if you noticed that. And you raised to 150, and he had already had 50 up, so he called. That tends to make me believe that his range is going to be a little bit weaker. So, I mean, he's could be just slopping around with some pair there. And well, I mean, I guess that would be an argument for checking, I guess. So,
Well, I'm glad you said that. I
it,
was thinking, I was like, I thought as he could have like anything. He could have two pair.
yeah, but I mean, he's not gonna. I mean, you're the pre-flop raiser. When you bet again here, he's not gonna bluff you. I mean, the board's a complete rainbow. There's nothing to semi-bluff really. You know what I mean? Like if you bet and he raises, unless he's a real psycho, or somebody who would have floated your flop bet with ace high, and then like decided that his pair of aces is great on the turn. Even if I mean some players will float a flop bet like there with a decent ace high, but then they'll just call if you bet again on the ace. You know what I mean? The main reason I think you should be betting there is, like I said, for balance. When when you're the pre-flop raiser and you make a continuation bet, which you often will with nothing, and you're called, you want to be able to continue aggressively on good cards, quote unquote scare cards to double barrel and stuff. And if you start playing your ace king like this, well, now you're not going to be able to bluff those cards. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, at least you did bet the river there. I think we have about another 6 minutes left or so in this video.
Yes.
6 minutes of playtime. So we'll take it to the end. I think this was of the three parts. I think this was the richest part, at least in the sense that it involved the most in-depth discussion, and I think it was good because we hit across a couple of very common concepts that were really important. You know, like the calling with a medium pair and a 3-bet pot. Number one, number two, dealing with very aggressive opponents, and the common pratfalls that we make where our own game sometimes deteriorates if we don't deal with it properly. Those are two very, very important points to cover, and I think that's why I chose to go into those in extreme detail. So while we have some filler time, you saw that the fantasy English Premier League game was up today.
I didn't get a chance to get over to it, but it'll be interesting to see the new values. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. Been waiting for that. Real quick, pausing here on table 2, ace queen suited on the button against a pre-flop raiser. I don't hate your re-raise, but when you're suited, I think it's got a lot of value to just call there. It's one of those hands that's a very good hand, and you want to see it, but it's one of those that if you call there, I mean, you re-raise and then you get re-raised, your hand is probably not good enough to go with. You kind of have to fold it. But at the same time, when you have a suited ace-queen, there's so many, more flops that you can play aggressively. So I think you should probably, your default should be to call there rather than to raise.
Yeah, I think it might be. I think it actually might be. It may be player specific in this one, although I think that player hasn't been there long, so I'm not actually totally sure. But I can tell you, I don't always raise with in that position with that hand. But I may have thought I had a good reason for it.
Okay. Remember, you can always make some plays on the flop. I mean, you just call pre-flop and the flop comes down low. You can choose to make a play, raise a flop bet then, with a complete miss. And then if you are called, you do have overcards to fall back on potentially. And of course, there's more flops like this that you can flop and then play aggressively. You know what I mean? But your hand is too not good enough to be able to handle a 4-bet, but too good and has too many prospects also with it being suited to have to fold. Do you know what I mean? So when you raise and you make it 450, and now if he comes back over you and makes it 11, you probably have to fold, and that's kind of gross. You know what I mean? Because the hand is so nice in that spot. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you should be calling those most of the time. Yep, very clear spot to raise, obviously. As he's clearly trying to price himself in with something kind of weak. Oh, well, I won't say clearly, but that's what it appears. And of course, if he does go back over you, if he does have something in, you can obviously call with the hand you have. So, very clear spot to raise. Whoa. I don't like table 4, what I'm starting to see here. Pre-flop. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I think I was paying too much attention to table 2 that I didn't realize it was a re-raise pot. Am I right there?
No, it wasn't. I just raised pre-flop and bet the flop.
Yeah, that's a pretty bad spot to bet the flop. It's what I can say about it, it's a very, very classic way ahead, way behind case. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what worse hands are going to call you there? And of those worse hands, if you're going to say like a 10 or whatever you're going to call you, 10. If it's going to call you once, he'll pay you off later anyway. But so I mean, there's not too many worse hands that'll call you. There's you know, no better hands are going to fold, and it's a classic way ahead, way behind situation. And I mean, this is a very, very clear technical mistake to bet that. I'm actually, maybe you want to talk a little bit about why you did it, because I know that that's not. I know you know that. I know that we've talked about these kind of spots, and it's a very kind of an obvious spot to not bet. So obviously something came over you, and we should probably discuss it briefly.
Um. No, I think it was just that the opponent was one of those like all or nothing, like either very interested or not interested, and clearly check raise. So I mean, I really don't have a good explanation. I thought that it was just gonna go, check fold, but I hear what you're saying. Like I see the no, way ahead, way behind. I think I told you before. It's really interesting, and I think it'd be interesting for other people that like sometimes you have a certain uh, a certain idea, a certain motif in your in your mind, and sometimes you lose sight of a motif that's very important, like this one, the way ahead, way behind one, which I think I also made a mistake with that a little earlier, right? So it's like, I wonder if it's just like I wasn't really being present by me, in this session. I was kind of thinking about other things.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what I mean. First of all, we want to get you to play on autopilot as less of the time as possible. But second of all, we want to improve your game to the point where you don't make these technical mistakes, even if you are autopiloting, because nobody can play their sharpest all the time. But this is one that should never have entered your mind, that this was a spot to bet. With the jacks. I mean, and so, especially by the way, if this guy's like an all or nothing, and also keep in mind, given that the board is quite draw heavy, you're in a position where you may end up like folding the best hand too. Obviously you're not going to call the check raise. So, and you're really never getting value out of a weaker hand,
Yeah.
or getting a better hand to fold. So, I mean, it was a pretty serious technical error, and we need to get those out of your game. So make sure you understand that one. Not only understand that it's an error, but try to investigate yourself why you made it, so that you don't repeat that kind of error.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
I do like your fold there to show some discipline. I like your fold on table one. Given that there were, I think, 4 at the flop, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That was why. Exactly. Yeah.
I do like also the not betting the queen jack. I'm pausing here again. The queen jack on table 2, just because it's not exactly a way ahead, way behind kind of situation, obviously, but since there's pocket pairs and stuff that you're ahead of, but you're not going to really fold out an ace or a king very often. And the hands that you would take it down from with a bet now, you'll probably take it down from with a bet later if you want anyway. You know what I mean? Like if it checks through again on the turn, you can bet on the turn. So you're safe. Plus the fact that you do have a gut shot gives you an additional reason to check back, because you close the action, and if someone was lurking for a check raise, you could hit on them before they have a chance to blow you off the hand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was a good check.
Cool.
I would bet it now if it checks through to you. Yeah, I don't like the check there that time. could almost consider a call here.
I think I was considering a raise or a fold.
A raise
Oh.
is really hard to make sense of. You did call. Yeah. It was a pretty kind of...
A raise would have worked, though.
Maybe. I mean, your hand doesn't make a lot of sense. For the raising hand there. What are you raising?
No, that didn't make a lot of sense. So
Right, yeah, I mean, yeah, it depends on what level you're on. I mean, what hand did you really check twice and now you're raising? I mean, a weak ace, I guess.
Yeah, you know what? I think I called that because I think my opponent might have had like Queen 10 or Jack 10.
Yeah. No, I actually, that was my first instinct too. I mean, I didn't expect you to be ahead. I expected you to lose the pot, but I expected you to be ahead enough to call one into 475. You know.
Yeah.
You had the nut no pair hand. I think we're in the last minute or so of playtime.
Yeah, I think that's it
Okay.
for interesting or any hands.
Okay. All right. Sorry about the little blip, guys. I paused the Camtasia by accident instead of pausing the video, which I didn't even need to pause the video because it's the end. So anyway, we're recording again. I think there was probably like a momentary blip there. Anyway, yeah. So it was a good session. I think that we went over some very important concepts. I think that I know this this whole thing, parts 1, 2, and 3 of the series was all one session, but breaking it down into parts 1, 2, and 3, there were a lot more mistakes on your part in this last part 3 than there were in the other two. If I remember correctly, your part 1 was exceptionally well played. So you can look back on that and see what you did. Part 2 wasn't poorly played. I think there just wasn't as much. There was a little mistake here, a missed opportunity there, but nothing really that dramatic. In this part, I'm certainly not gonna say you played poorly, and I would if I thought that. But you definitely did make a technical mistake several times. A lot more than I've seen out of you since you've been progressing. You made several technical mistakes, and you also made an emotional mistake in terms of that hand with the SNG wizard, letting his aggression sort of envelop you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it would behoove you to look back and look at these videos that we've made, study them again, look at what we've talked about, and actually compare how you played in the first third, i.e. part 1, with the last third, which was too dramatic. The first third was the best I've ever seen you play, if I remember correctly. And this one is again, I'm not going to say you played terribly. You've made great strides as a player since we've been doing this project, but there were definitely some mistakes that you're too good for now, and so you need to both understand the mistakes and both understand the mistakes in of themselves, but also from a more macroscopic standpoint. Try to understand why you made those mistakes, and so that you don't repeat those things.
Right.
You have any comments or any questions or anything?
No, it's just I think it's funny. I think it's kind of great that the nines hand and where I bet the flop because I was confused, and the hand where I had the jack 8 and I went all the way with a weakish hand because I felt like it was best. I just think it's funny that it just shows those are two examples where I was just caught in two minds both times. I wasn't really sure, so I was just kind of treading along, and it shows like the consequences of that. Those are two, hands that I made at, big mistake in one and a pretty decent mistake in the other by calling that turn. So it really shows, that when you're caught in two minds, what can happen. You have to really stay focused, and have your reads and everything.
Yeah. I think the key point. I think you said that, and when you say caught in two minds, I don't know if this is sort of saying the same thing. I think what happened in both of those hands, and in both of them, they were completely different types of hands. But in both of them, you tried to substitute for thinking, because thinking was difficult, because they were difficult spots. And so you tried to play in a way that just, in the first hand, you would just wanted to bet because you didn't want to deal with his bets. But clearly that wasn't plus EV. In the second hand, you just took the attitude that, okay, he's aggressive, let me just call him down without really thinking it through. And so, I mean, really, I mean, it's like it is, like I've always said in poker, the reason there are winners and losers is because there is no substitute for thinking. And I'm glad you do recognize that. I mean, I feel confident that you're going to do a lot better in those kinds of spots. Again, I mean, the fact of the matter is, when you play best poker, sometimes by definition, you're going to put yourself in some tough spots and make some tough decisions. And sometimes those decisions are going to be wrong, but it's still better to put yourself in the spot to make the decision rather than to just try to make the decision go away by taking a substandard line.
Yeah, I learned that lesson in I think our first video, and it's actually really paid dividends. So I think I wrote about that in my blog. It's one of the best things I've learned. So it's cool that it's showing through most of the time.
Yeah, no, and it certainly is. And I know I've been a little bit critical of you in the session. It doesn't take away from the improvements that you made as a player. Obviously, I'm really excited about your progress, and just a good session to review. A couple places where a few things went wrong, but overall you're still doing well. Anything else? Any other questions?
No, that'll do it.
All right, great. Guys, as always, you can follow Chris's journey on his blog. His Bluefire member name is Not Good Yet. Please give us feedback on this video series. On my blog or his blog or in the Protege's journey forum. Also, I think that it seems that we got a lot of positive feedback from our first hand analysis video. So, Chris, you liked that video too, right? Did you get a lot out of it? All right,
really
so
rich, yeah.
I think what we'll do is we'll alternate having a session in which we record, 2 or 3 or 4 videos from a session that he plays, with 1 or 2 hand analysis videos, and that at each limit that he does. So Chris, maybe the next thing you can do is sort of accumulate some hands at this limit, and at $50 if you get to the point to move up there, and we can do a hand analysis video next when you're ready.
All right.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. This is Niman Kenkre for BlueFirePoker.com.